At 2 in the morning, the sound of boots on frozen gravel pulled me out of sleep. I looked through the window and saw my daughter and her husband dragging a locked wooden crate across the yard toward their car. His voice carried through the winter air. If your mother finds out, everything falls apart. By sunrise, I had opened the basement. What was hidden down there didn't just break my heart, it destroyed my entire world. I am truly grateful you are here with me. Before we continue, drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. Also, please note that some parts of this story include fictional elements for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real people or places is coincidental, but the message behind it is meaningful. The cold woke me first. Then the sound. A dull, heavy scraping across frozen ground, the kind of noise that doesn't belong to the middle of the night. My eyes opened to darkness. The bedroom was freezing. November in Vermont doesn't care how many blankets you pile on. It finds a way in through the walls, through the glass, through your bones. I blinked at the clock on the nightstand. The red numbers glowed back at me. 2:13 in the morning. I lay still for a moment, listening. The sound came again. Boots crunching on gravel. Then a low thud, like something heavy being set down. My pulse quickened. I pushed myself up slowly, joints protesting, and crossed to the window. The glass was frosted at the edges, but through the center, I could see the yard below. Silver and blue, under a half moon. Snow covered the fields. The maple trees stood bare and dark against the sky like the bones of something ancient. And there, near the side of the house where the old stone path led to the driveway, two figures moved in the darkness. One was tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of quiet urgency that only comes when someone doesn't want to be seen. The other was slimmer, shorter, pulling a wooden crate across the ground by a rope handle. The crate was large, maybe 3 feet long, and clearly heavy. It left deep grooves in the snow behind it. I pressed closer to the glass. My breath fogged the window, and I wiped it with the sleeve of my nightgown. The motion sensor light near the garage flickered on, and for just a moment, I saw their faces. My heart stopped. Jessica, my daughter, and beside her, Kevin, her husband. They were loading the crate into the back of their black SUV, the one Kevin always drove, the one with the Greenfield Enterprises parking sticker on the rear window. Jessica climbed up and pushed the crate deeper into the cargo area. Kevin stood below, scanning the yard, his eyes sweeping toward the house. I stepped back from the window, pressing myself against the wall. Had he seen me? I waited, not breathing. 5 seconds. 10. I leaned back toward the glass, just enough to see. Kevin was speaking. His voice was low, but the bedroom window was cracked open half an inch. I had forgotten to close it yesterday after airing out the room, and in the silence of a Vermont winter night, sound travels like it has nowhere else to go. "Hurry up," he said. "We need to be out of here before Ryan wakes up." Then Jessica's voice, tight and nervous. What if she already heard us? Kevin grabbed her arm. Not rough, but firm. He leaned close to her face. "If your mother finds out, everything falls apart. Everything. Do you understand?" Jessica pulled free. She didn't answer. She just climbed into the passenger seat and closed the door softly. The way you close a door when you don't want anyone to know you were ever there. Kevin walked around to the driver's side. He paused, one hand on the door handle, and looked up at the house, straight at my window. I held my breath. The moonlight was behind me. The room was dark. There was no way he could see me, but the way he stared, long and steady and calculating, made my skin crawl. Then he got in. The engine started, barely louder than a whisper. He didn't turn the headlights on. The SUV rolled down the gravel driveway, slow and careful, tires crunching through frozen snow. Only when it reached the main road did the headlights come to life. 2 white eyes opening in the dark. Then, they were gone. I stood at the window for a long time after that. My hands were trembling. Not from the cold, though the cold was terrible. From something deeper, something I couldn't name yet but could feel settling into my chest like a stone dropped into still water. What was in that crate? Where were they taking it at 2 in the morning? And why didn't Jessica want me to know? I thought about waking Ryan. He was just down the hall, my son, 31 years old, steady and good. He would listen. He would believe me. But what would I tell him? I saw your sister and Kevin dragging a crate out of the house in the middle of the night, and I don't know why. Ryan would try to calm me down. He would say I was still grieving, still not sleeping well, still seeing things through the fog of losing Thomas. Thomas, my husband. The man who slept on the other side of this bed for 47 years. The man whose pillow still held the faint shape of his head, whose reading glasses still sat on the nightstand where he left them 9 months ago, the morning he walked to the sugar house and never came back. They said it was an accident. A beam collapsed while he was repairing the loft inside the sugar house. The bolts gave way, and the timber came down on top of him. He was 70 years old. They said these things happen on old farms. They said it was nobody's fault. I believed them. I had no reason not to. Thomas was gone. And the world kept turning. And I was left here in this house that was too big and too quiet. Sleeping on one side of a bed meant for two. Reaching for him in my dreams, and waking to empty air. But tonight, standing at this window, watching my daughter disappear into the darkness with a locked crate and a secret, something shifted inside me. A feeling I couldn't quite place. Not suspicion exactly. Something older and deeper. The way animals sense a storm before the sky even changes. I walked back to the bed and sat on the edge. The mattress creaked. Thomas's side was smooth and cold. I put my hand on it, the way I did every night, just to feel where he used to be. Something's wrong. I whispered to the empty room. I can feel it. Tomorrow, I would go down to the basement, where Jessica and Kevin had been. I would see what they had taken and what they might have left behind. I would find answers. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known sitting there in the dark with my hand on my dead husband's side of the bed, was that the truth waiting for me was far worse than stolen property. Because in 3 days, I would learn that my husband's death was not an accident, and my daughter's husband was the one who had taken him from me. The smell of coffee pulled me back to the present. I was sitting at the kitchen table, both hands wrapped around a mug I had not taken a single sip from. Steam curled between my fingers and vanished into the pale morning light. Outside the window, the Vermont sky hung low and gray, heavy with the promise of more snow. You sleep okay, Mom? Ryan stood by the counter, pouring himself a second cup. He was already dressed for work. Flannel shirt, canvas pants, boots laced tight. 31 years old, and built like his father. Same broad shoulders. Same quiet way of moving through a room. He had Thomas's hands too, big and rough, the kind that could split firewood in the morning and cradle a newborn lamb by afternoon. Fine, I said. Slept fine. He studied me with his father's eyes, brown and steady, the kind that saw more than they let on. But he did not push. That was Ryan. He never pushed. Gotta check the East Grove today, he said, pulling on his jacket. Some lines need replacing before tapping season. Might not be back until dark. You need anything? No, I am good. He hesitated at the door. You sure? I am sure, sweetheart. I listened to his truck start and fade down the gravel driveway. Then the house went silent. That silence was the thing I hated most about losing Thomas. Not the empty chair by the fireplace or the reading glasses still sitting on his nightstand. It was the silence. This house used to breathe with his presence. He would be downstairs before dawn, stoking the wood stove, humming folk songs his father taught him. I would hear the clatter of his coffee cup, the creak of his boots, the murmur of the weather radio on the counter. Now there was nothing but the clock on the wall and the wind pressing against the windows. My name is Margaret Sullivan, but everyone calls me Maggie. I am 69 years old, I spent 35 years teaching second grade at Stowe Elementary School. I have read thousands of stories to thousands of children, but nothing in those years prepared me for the story unfolding inside my own family. This farm, 30 acres of maple grove and rolling pasture in the Green Mountains outside Stowe, had been Sullivan land for 3 generations. Thomas's grandfather cleared the first trees and tapped the first maples in 1926. His father built the sugar house and turned the operation into a real business. And Thomas poured his whole life into every acre. Every spring he was out before sunrise, hanging buckets, checking sap lines, boiling syrup in the sugar house until the steam rose so thick you could not see your own hand. The smell of maple clung to his clothes for weeks. I used to say, I married a man who smelled like pancakes. We raised 2 children here. Jessica came first, born in 1984. Smart, ambitious, restless from the day she could walk. She left for college at 18 and never truly came back. Business degree, then an MBA, then a boutique organic food company in Burlington that she built from nothing. She married Kevin Price 6 years ago. He was a financial officer at an investment firm in Montpelier. Polished shoes, expensive suits, a handshake that lasted 1 second too long. Thomas never warmed to him. After Kevin and Jessica would leave, Thomas would sit on the porch with his pipe unlit, staring at the fields. Something off about that man, he would say, and I would tell him what I always told him. Every father worries about his daughter's husband. It does not mean anything. He would grunt and watch the driveway long after their car disappeared. I should have listened. Ryan came 10 years later, born in 1994. The opposite of Jessica, in every way. Quiet where she was loud. Patient where she was restless. He studied agriculture, came home after graduation, and took over the daily running of the farm. Every evening he called me just to check in. You eat dinner, Mom? You need anything? That was the kind of son he was. Thomas died on March 4th, 2025. A Saturday, cold and clear. He had been working in the sugar house since early morning, repairing the storage loft. The scaffolding was new. He had set it up himself 2 days before and checked every bolt. At around 11 that morning, the beam above the loft gave way. The bolts sheared clean, and a timber weighing over 200 pounds came down on his chest. Ryan found him. He had gone out to bring his father coffee and found the sugar house door open, the scaffold collapsed, and Thomas lying beneath the beam. The paramedics said he died almost instantly. Small mercy, they called it. I remember standing in the yard that afternoon watching them carry Thomas out under a white sheet. The maple trees were bare, their branches black against the gray sky. Ryan stood beside me with his hand on my shoulder. He did not cry. Not then. But that night I heard him through the wall, sobbing so hard the bed frame shook. They ruled it an accident. Structural failure. Old building, bad luck. The case was closed, and I was left in a house full of ghosts. Jessica came for the funeral. She cried beautifully, the way she did everything, with precision and poise. Kevin stood beside her in a black suit, shaking hands, saying all the right things, but his eyes kept drifting to the sugar house, to the barn, to the fields, like he was appraising the place rather than mourning the man who built it. After the funeral, Jessica called once a week, then every 2 weeks, then once a month. She would ask how I was holding up, but I could hear the distraction in her voice, her fingers tapping a keyboard, Kevin talking in the background. She would mention work, some deal, some partnership, then say she loved me and hang up. Kevin never called at all. That was my world before last night. A widow on a farm, too big for one person, with a son who loved her and a daughter drifting further away with every passing month. I had accepted it. I had made peace with the silence and the long Vermont nights. But then I heard boots on frozen gravel at 2 in the morning. And now I stood at the top of the basement stairs, looking down into the darkness, with a key in my hand and a question that frightened me more than the cold. What had my daughter been hiding in my house? I gripped the railing. The air rising from below smelled of damp stone and old wood. I took the first step down. The stairs groaned under my weight. 14 steps down, each one older than the last, the woods soft and dark with age. I kept one hand on the railing and the other pressed against the stone wall. The air grew colder with every step, heavy and damp. Carrying the smell of earth and old timber, the basement had been Thomas's space. He kept his tools down here. His workbench, his collection of hand planes and chisels, passed down from his father. There were boxes of old photographs, tax records going back decades, Christmas decorations we had not used in years. After he died, I had come down here once to look for his insurance documents. I found them in the filing cabinet, signed everything the lawyer needed, and never came back. I reached the bottom and pulled the chain on the overhead light. A single bare bulb clicked to life, casting a pale yellow glow across the room. Everything looked the same at first. The workbench along the far wall, tools hanging from their pegs, jars of nails and screws lined up on the shelf above. Thomas's old canvas jacket still hung from a hook near the stairs, the one he wore when the weather was too cold for anything else. I could still see the shape of his shoulders in the fabric. But something was different. I stood still and let my eyes adjust. Then I saw it. The tall wooden shelving unit against the east wall had been moved. Not by much, maybe 6 inches to the left. But I knew this basement the way I knew every room in this house. That shelf had stood in the same spot for 20 years, bolted to the wall behind it. Now there was a gap between the shelf and the wall, and the bolt holes were empty. Someone had unfastened it and shifted it over. I walked closer. The concrete floor around the shelf was clean, too clean. The rest of the basement had a fine layer of dust over everything, the kind that settles when a space goes untouched for months. But here the dust had been swept away, and in its place were long, deep grooves scratched into the concrete. Drag marks. Something heavy had been pulled across this floor recently. Very recently. I crouched down and followed the marks with my fingers. They ran from behind the shelf to the base of the stairs, then curved toward the bulkhead door that opened to the outside. That was the path Jessica and Kevin had taken last night. They had dragged whatever was in that crate up through the bulkhead and out to the driveway. My knees ached as I lowered myself further. I was about to stand when I noticed something caught in the narrow gap where the floor met the base of the wall. A scrap of paper, folded once, wedged into the crack like it had slipped from someone's pocket. I pulled it free and unfolded it carefully. The edges were torn, the paper yellowed, the kind Thomas used to tear from the legal pads he kept on his workbench. And the handwriting. I would have recognized it anywhere. The neat slanted letters, the way he crossed his T's with a single sharp stroke, the way he underlined words he considered important. Thomas's handwriting. 3 lines. That was all. Greenfield Enterprises. Randall Holt. 7.2 million. I read it 3 times. Each time the words made less sense. Greenfield Enterprises. I had never heard that name. Randall Holt. I did not know who that was. 7.2 million. 7.2 million what? Dollars? My hands were shaking. I pressed the paper flat against my thigh and closed my eyes, trying to think. Thomas had written this. Thomas had been down here, and he had written these words on a scrap of paper, and somehow that paper had ended up wedged against the wall, where my daughter and her husband had been moving things in the middle of the night. I thought back to the weeks before Thomas died. He had been different. Not sick, not angry, just distracted, preoccupied in a way I had not seen before. He would sit at the kitchen table after dinner, staring at nothing. His coffee, getting cold. Sometimes I would find him in the living room late at night, the television off, just sitting in the dark. One evening in February, about 3 weeks before the accident, I came upstairs and found him standing at the bedroom window, looking out at the sugar house. His face was tight, His jaw set the way it got when something was eating at him. "Thomas, what is wrong?" He turned and smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Nothing, Maggie. Just thinking about spring. Tapping season is coming. You have been thinking about spring every night for a week. That is a lot of thinking." He crossed the room and kissed my forehead. His lips were warm. His hands were cold. Old farmers worry. It is what we do. But it was not spring he was worried about. I knew that now. He had been worried about something else entirely. Something he had written on a scrap of paper and hidden in this basement. Something connected to Greenfield Enterprises and a man named Randall Holt, and a number so large it did not belong anywhere near our small maple farm. And there was something else. In those last weeks, Thomas had been spending more time than usual at the cabin. Our cabin, the small one-room structure he had built with his own hands deep in the maple grove, back when we were young and newly married, and the whole world was just this farm and each other. It was our place. We would go there on Sunday mornings with coffee and sit in the 2 chairs by the window, watching the light come through the trees. After the children were grown, we went less often. But Thomas had started going again in those final weeks. I would see him walking the trail into the grove, a notebook under his arm, his shoulders hunched against the cold. When I asked where he had been, he would say the same thing every time. "Just checking the trees, Maggie, making sure they are ready." He was not checking the trees. I understood that now. He had been hiding something. And if Thomas wanted to keep something safe, truly safe, there was only one place in the world he would put it. I stood up slowly, my knees cracking, the scrap of paper clutched in my hand. Through the small basement window, I could see the edge of the maple grove, the bare trees standing like sentinels against the white sky, the cabin. Whatever Thomas had known, whatever he had been afraid of, the answers were waiting for me in that cabin, in the woods where we had once been so happy. I climbed the stairs, pulled on my coat and boots, and stepped outside into the cold. The trail to the cabin wound through the heart of the maple grove. In summer, the canopy was so thick the sunlight came through in coins of gold. But now, in late November, the trees were stripped bare, their trunks rising gray and silver on both sides of the path, their branches reaching into the white sky like arms raised in prayer. My boots crunched through frozen leaves and patches of snow. The air was sharp and still. No birds, no wind. Just my breathing and my footsteps. Thomas used to say these trees had seen more history than any library. They had survived 200 winters, and every spring they gave up their sweetness without complaint. He loved them the way some men love their children, quietly and completely. The cabin appeared through the trees after 10 minutes. Small, built from hand-hewn pine, with a sloped roof and a single window facing east. Thomas built it the summer we married, 1978. He was 23. I was 22. We had nothing but this land and each other, and the belief that those things were enough. The brass padlock was green with age. I had the key. Thomas gave me a copy the day he finished building. "This is ours, Maggie. No matter what happens, this will always be ours." The lock clicked open. I pushed the door inward, and the smell hit me. Pine and dust and something faintly sweet. The ghost of maple sap soaked into the walls over decades. One room, 12 feet square. 2 wooden chairs by the window, a small table between them. A shelf holding a kerosene lantern and paperbacks Thomas had read until their spines cracked white. If Thomas had hidden something, it would be in the floor. Years ago we discovered a loose plank. Thomas turned it into a hiding spot. A bottle of bourbon. Love letters. Silly things that mattered only to us. I knelt beside the table and felt along the boards. 3rd plank from the east wall. It gave under my fingers. I pried it up and found a wooden box the size of a cigar case. Heavier than expected. Inside were 2 things. A worn leather notebook and a small black USB drive. I opened the notebook. Thomas's handwriting. Neat, careful, dated. September 20th, 2024. Kevin asked about the property value at dinner. Acreage, zoning, development potential. Said it was curiosity. Something felt wrong. November 15th, 2024. Found documents in Jessica's old bedroom after Thanksgiving. Greenfield Enterprises development proposal. 30 acres, resort and spa complex. Our land. Someone is planning to sell. January 8th, 2025. Followed the paper trail. Christine Novak, attorney in Montpelier, filed transfer documents for the east parcel. Maggie's signature on the authorization, but Maggie did not sign anything. I compared it to her real signature. It is a forgery. February 2nd, 2025. Kevin met a man at the diner in Stowe. I sat 2 booths away. Randall Holt. Runs Greenfield Enterprises. They discussed timelines, closing before spring, total value. $7.2 million. Kevin said the family would not be a problem. He would handle it. February 28th, 2025. I recorded them. Parked near Kevin's car at the gas station on Route 100. He was on a video call with Holt. Phone propped on the dashboard. I filmed through my windshield with Ryan's old camcorder. Kevin said his exact words. Once the old man is out of the picture, we close the deal. Jessica will handle her mother. The old man. Thomas writing about himself. About hearing his own son-in-law call him an obstacle. March 2nd, 2025. I need to go to the police. I have the notebook and the recording. But I must be careful. If Kevin finds out I do not know what he will do. I will go Monday. That was the last entry. March 2nd. Thomas died on March 4th. A Saturday. He never made it to Monday. I closed the notebook. Tears blurred my vision. I wiped my face and locked the cabin. Back at the house, I went straight to the desk in the living room and plugged the USB into my laptop. One file. A video. 4 minutes and 12 seconds. I pressed play. The image was shaky, filmed through a windshield, smeared with road salt. But Kevin was clear, sitting in his car, phone propped on the dashboard. On the screen was a man I had never seen. Gray hair, sharp jaw, expensive glasses. Randall Holt. Kevin's voice was relaxed. The timeline works. We close in April after the snow melts. Novak has the paperwork ready. Jessica is on board. She does not love it, but she understands the math. Holt's voice came through thin and small. And the old man? Kevin leaned back. Once the old man is out of the picture, we close the deal. Jessica will handle her mother. The mother is sentimental, but she will fold once there is no one left to fight for the place. I stopped the video. My hand was shaking so badly I nearly knocked the laptop off the desk. Once the old man is out of the picture. 3 weeks after Kevin spoke those words, my husband was dead beneath a 200-pound beam in the sugar house. I sat in the living room staring at the wall. The notebook lay open on my lap. The USB drive sat in my pocket like a coal burning through the fabric. Outside, the afternoon light was fading. The maple grove was turning dark. Thomas had known. He had spent months gathering evidence, tracking the conspiracy, documenting every meeting and every lie. He had planned to go to the police, and someone had made sure he never got there. This was not just a land deal. This was something far, far worse. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the dark living room with the notebook on the kitchen table and the USB drive in my coat pocket, turning the same questions over and over until the sky began to lighten outside the windows. The knock came at 8:30 the next morning. I was still in yesterday's clothes, standing at the sink, forcing myself to drink a glass of water. The sound startled me so badly, I nearly dropped the glass. I set it down and crossed to the front door. Dorothy Chen stood on the porch, a foil-covered plate in her hands and worry etched into every line of her face. She was 74, small and wiry, with silver hair cut short and dark eyes that missed nothing. She had been our neighbor for 30 years, a retired emergency room nurse from Stowe General. She and Thomas used to trade vegetables from their gardens in summer and argue about the best way to stack firewood in fall. Margaret, she said. She only used my full name when something was serious. I brought cinnamon rolls. Can I come in? I stepped aside. She walked past me into the kitchen, set the plate on the table, and sat down without being asked. I poured 2 cups of coffee and joined her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Dorothy wrapped her hands around the mug and stared into the steam. I should have come sooner, she said quietly. I have been carrying this for months, and it has been eating me alive. Carrying what? She looked up. Her eyes were red at the edges. It is about Thomas. About the day he died. My chest tightened. What about it? Dorothy took a breath. That scaffolding was brand new. Thomas showed it to me the day before the accident. He walked me through the sugar house because I brought him soup, and he wanted to show me the repairs he was making to the loft. He pointed at every joint, every bolt, every brace. He was proud of the work. He said he had checked everything twice. She paused. Her voice dropped. Thomas was a careful man, Margaret. He built things to last. I watched him test that scaffold with his own weight. He bounced on it. He pulled at the supports. Everything held. There was nothing wrong with that structure the day before he died. I sat very still. What are you saying? I am saying that scaffolding did not just fail. Something happened between the day Thomas showed it to me and the day it came down on top of him. She hesitated, then continued. And there is something else. The morning Thomas died, I was out walking my dog along the road. I saw Kevin's car parked near your sugar house. It was early, maybe 7 o'clock. Kevin was inside alone. I thought it was strange because Jessica was not with him and Thomas was still at the house having breakfast. I waved, but Kevin did not see me. Or pretended not to. How long was he there? I passed by again on my way back about 2 hours later. His car was gone. 2 hours. Kevin had been alone in the sugar house for 2 hours the morning Thomas died. The same sugar house where the scaffolding collapsed the next day. Dorothy reached across the table and gripped my hand. I told the police what I saw. They wrote it down, but nothing came of it. They had already ruled it an accident. I did not push because I had no proof. Just a feeling. But Margaret, something was wrong about that day. I have felt it in my bones ever since. After Dorothy left, I went back to the basement. This time, I brought a stronger flashlight and searched every inch of the floor around the displaced shelf. I found it in the far corner, behind a stack of old paint cans, a section of floorboard that was slightly higher than the ones around it. I wedged my fingers underneath and pulled. It came up with a groan, revealing a shallow gap between the joists. Inside were 2 things: a rolled-up piece of paper and a single page torn from a notebook. I unrolled the paper first. It was a diagram of the sugar house scaffolding, drawn in Thomas's precise hand. Every beam was labeled. Every bolt was numbered. And in the bottom corner, circled twice in red ink, were the words, "Bolts checked November 2nd. All secure. November 2nd. The day before Kevin was seen alone in the sugar house. The day before Thomas fell." I picked up the torn notebook page. The handwriting was shaky, rushed. Nothing like the careful script in the cabin notebook. Thomas had written this in a hurry, maybe in fear. Kevin was in the sugar house alone for 2 hours on November 3rd. I checked the scaffold on November 2nd. Every bolt was tight. The next day I fell. This was not an accident. If you are reading this, protect Ryan. Jessica does not know what Kevin did. I read the last line again. Jessica does not know what Kevin did. My daughter did not know. Thomas believed that. He wrote it clearly, in his own hand, in what might have been his last written words. Jessica had agreed to sell the land. She had gone along with the fraud and the forged signatures. But she did not know that Kevin had gone further. She did not know that her husband had murdered her father. I sat on the cold basement floor with the torn page in my trembling hands. The flashlight beam wavered against the stone walls. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and uneven, echoing in the silence. My daughter was a thief. She had stolen from her own family, signed away land that 3 generations of Sullivans had bled to keep. But she was not a murderer. The man sleeping beside her every night, the man who sat at our Thanksgiving table and carved the turkey and called me Mom, he was the one who had loosened those bolts. He was the one who had taken Thomas from me, and Jessica had no idea. I pressed the page against my chest and closed my eyes. Tears ran hot down my face, dripping onto the concrete floor. Thomas had known. He had written his warning and hidden it here, hoping that if something happened to him, someone would find it. Someone would read his words and understand. I had found it. 9 months too late. But I had found it. I had 2 choices now. Go to the police and watch my daughter's life crumble alongside her husband's. Or bury everything and let Thomas's death remain an accident forever. I stood up slowly. My knees ached. My hands would not stop shaking. But my mind was clear. I knew what Thomas would want. And I knew what I had to do. The law office sat on a quiet street in Montpelier, a brick building with tall windows and a brass nameplate beside the door. Frank Prescott, attorney at law. I had known Frank for 20 years. He handled Thomas's will, our property deeds, the farm's liability insurance. He was a steady man with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses who never raised his voice, even when the news was bad. I arrived early. The receptionist smiled and waved me through. Frank met me in the conference room, a small space with wood paneling and a window overlooking the street where snow was beginning to fall. He was not alone. Sitting across from him was a man I had never met. Tall, broad-shouldered, late 40s, with a clean-shaven face and sharp blue eyes that watched me the way a hawk watches the ground. "Maggie," Frank said, standing. "This is Detective James Harlow, Vermont State Police." Harlow extended his hand. His grip was firm but careful, the handshake of a man who understood that the person across from him was fragile. "Mrs. Sullivan, Frank told me you had something important to share. I appreciate you coming in." I sat down and placed 3 things on the polished table: the leather notebook, the USB drive, and the torn page from the basement with Thomas's final words. Then I told them everything. The sound at 2 in the morning, the crate, Kevin's voice, the basement, the cabin, Dorothy Chen, the scaffolding diagram, the video. Neither man interrupted. Frank sat with his fingers laced, his face unreadable. Harlow took notes in a small leather book, writing quickly but neatly, pausing only to ask me to repeat a name or a date. When I finished, Harlow set his pen down and looked at me for a long moment. "Mrs. Sullivan, this is substantial evidence. The notebook, the video recording, the scaffolding documentation, your neighbor's testimony. Taken together, they paint a clear picture of fraud, forgery, and potentially something much more serious." "You mean murder?" I said. My voice sounded flat and foreign in my own ears. "I mean, we have grounds to investigate your husband's death as a homicide. But to build a case that will hold up in court, we need more than documents and a recording made through a windshield. We need direct testimony. Confessions, ideally on record." Frank leaned forward. "James, what are you proposing?" Harlow turned to me. "Mrs. Sullivan, we have reason to believe your daughter and her husband will return to your property to retrieve additional documents related to the land sale. Based on the timeline in your husband's notes and the activity you witnessed 2 nights ago, we believe the final transaction is imminent. We would like to set up surveillance inside your sugar house, cameras, microphones, and we would like you to wear a recording device when you confront them." The room felt smaller suddenly. "You want me to confront my daughter and her husband?" and whoever else shows up. We believe Randall Holt and Christine Novak may also be present for the final exchange. When you have them talking, when they have admitted enough on record, you say a code phrase. We will be listening. The moment we hear it, we move in. What is the code phrase? Harlow paused. Something natural. Something that would not seem out of place in the conversation, but that you would not say by accident. I thought for a moment. The answer came to me without effort, rising from somewhere deep and quiet inside my chest. Thomas deserves to rest in peace. Harlow wrote it down. That works. When we hear those words, we come through the door. 30 seconds, maybe less. 4 officers positioned around the sugar house, out of sight. Frank put a hand on my arm. Maggie, you do not have to do this. We can pursue other avenues. Subpoenas, warrants, a longer investigation. How long would that take? Months, maybe a year. I shook my head. Kevin knows something is off. He was at the house 2 days ago checking the sugar house. If we wait, they will move the documents, destroy the evidence, and my husband's death stays an accident forever. Harlow nodded slowly. I agree. The window is narrow. But I have to be honest with you. This is not without risk. Kevin Price may be dangerous. He may react unpredictably when confronted. We will do everything in our power to keep you safe. But there are no guarantees. I understand. There is one more thing. Harlow reached into a bag beside his chair and set a shotgun on the table. A Remington. Old but well-maintained. I would like to place this inside the sugar house, somewhere within reach but out of sight. If the situation escalates before we can get to you, I want you to have options. I stared at the gun. I had not held a firearm in 15 years. Thomas used to take me shooting at the range in Johnson every fall, but that felt like another lifetime. I hope I will not need it. So do I, Harlow said quietly. There was a pause. I looked down at the notebook on the table, at Thomas's careful handwriting visible through the worn leather cover. Then I asked the question that had been pressing against my ribs since the moment I read his final words. My daughter, Jessica. Thomas wrote that she did not know about the murder, that she was involved in the land deal, but did not know Kevin killed him. Will that matter? Harlow chose his words carefully. If that is true, and if we can establish it clearly, it will matter for sentencing. She would still face charges for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft, but she would not be charged with murder or accessory to murder. She will still go to prison, most likely. Yes, I closed my eyes. Behind them I saw Jessica at 5 years old, sitting on Thomas's shoulders at the county fair, laughing so hard she could barely breathe. I saw her at 18, driving away to college, waving from the car window. I saw her at 35, standing at the altar with Kevin, smiling like the world was hers. What happens to my grandchildren? I asked. Autumn is 10. Mason is 8. If both their parents go to prison, what happens to them? The room went quiet. Harlow looked at Frank. Frank looked at me. Neither of them had an answer that would make it hurt less. I stood up. I will do it. For Thomas. I drove home through the snow. The wipers swept back and forth, and I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles were white. In 4 days, my daughter would walk into the sugar house. She would not walk out a free woman. I was about to destroy what was left of my family in order to save it, and I did not know if that made me brave or broken. The phone rang at 3:15 the next afternoon. I was standing at the kitchen sink, washing dishes I had already washed, just to keep my hands busy. The name on the screen made my stomach tighten. Jessica. I dried my hands on the towel, pressed my lips into what I hoped resembled a normal expression even though no one could see me, and answered, "Hi, sweetheart. Hey, Mom." Her voice was bright, almost too bright, the way it got when she was selling something. "How are you doing? I have been meaning to call. I am fine. Just keeping busy around the house." "Good. That is good. Listen, Kevin and I were thinking about coming up this weekend. Maybe Saturday? We could bring dinner. Spend some time together. Saturday was the 29th. One day before the planned confrontation, my pulse quickened, but I kept my voice slow and tired. That would be lovely, Jessica. I would like that. Great. Kevin might come a day earlier, actually. He said he wants to check on something at the property. The heating system in the sugar house or something. He worries about the pipes freezing. Kevin had never worried about the pipes in the sugar house in 6 years of marriage. Not once. I gripped the edge of the counter. That is thoughtful of him. There was a pause. I could hear Jessica breathing on the other end. Then her voice changed. Softer, thinner, like a thread pulled too tight. Mom, are you really okay? You sound tired. I am 69 years old, and it is November in Vermont. Tired is my natural state. She laughed, but it did not land right. It was the kind of laugh that covers something rather than expressing it. I had been a teacher for 35 years. I knew the sound of a child pretending everything was fine when it was not. And in that moment, despite everything, Jessica sounded exactly like a child. Okay, Mom. I love you. See you this weekend. I love you too, sweetheart. I hung up and stood at the counter gripping the phone. My daughter was afraid. I could hear it in her voice, in the way she laughed too quickly and talked too fast. She was afraid. But of what? Did she suspect I knew about the land deal? Or was she simply carrying the weight of her own guilt? The knowledge that she had forged her mother's name and sold her father's land behind everyone's back. I thought about Thomas's words. Jessica does not know what Kevin did. Maybe that was true. Maybe Jessica was a thief, but not a monster. Maybe she was trapped in something she did not fully understand, pulled along by a man who was far more dangerous than she realized. Or maybe I was making excuses because the alternative was too painful to accept. Kevin arrived the next morning. Alone, as Jessica had said. He pulled up in the black SUV at 10 o'clock, stepped out wearing a dark jacket and clean boots that had never touched a farm in their life. He carried a paper bag from a bakery in Burlington and a bottle of wine. "Morning, Mom," he said with that smooth smile. He always called me Mom. It used to bother Thomas. "Brought you some croissants and a nice Pinot Noir. That is sweet of you, Kevin. Come in." We sat at the kitchen table. He ate a croissant and drank coffee, while I wrapped my hands around my mug and watched him. He was good at this. The easy conversation, the casual questions, the concerned son-in-law checking on his aging mother-in-law. Every word was polished, every gesture rehearsed. 6 years of Sunday dinners and holiday visits had taught him exactly how to perform the role. "You know, Mom, I have been thinking." He set down his coffee and leaned forward with his elbows on the table. "This place is a lot for you and Ryan to manage. Have you given any more thought to selling? You could move into town, get a nice apartment, be closer to doctors and shops. This is my home, Kevin. Thomas built this life here. I understand that. I really do. But Thomas is gone, and this property is worth a lot of money. You could set yourself up for the rest of your life. Travel, relax, not worry about frozen pipes and broken fences." I took a sip of coffee that I could barely taste. "I will think about it." He smiled. "That is all I ask." After coffee, Kevin said he wanted to check the sugar house. I watched from the kitchen window as he crossed the yard. His boots, leaving clean prints in the snow. He pushed open the heavy door and disappeared inside. The sugar house. The place where Thomas died. Where Kevin had spent 2 hours alone the morning before the scaffolding collapsed. He was in there now, walking the same floor, touching the same walls, breathing the same air. And he had no idea that 3 cameras and 2 microphones were about to be installed in that exact space. He came out 10 minutes later, brushing dust from his jacket. He walked back to the kitchen, and I met him at the door. "Everything okay in there?" "Fine." That old place should have been torn down years ago, though. It is a liability, waiting to happen. I felt the anger rise so fast it nearly choked me. I swallowed it down and forced my face into something tired and soft. Thomas loved that sugar house. He spent every spring in there. Kevin shrugged. Times change, Mom. He left 20 minutes later. I stood at the window and watched him walk to the SUV. But instead of driving away, he stopped at the end of the driveway. He pulled out his phone. Even from this distance, I could see his jaw tighten. He spoke quickly, sharply, his free hand gripping the steering wheel. Then he looked back toward the house, straight at the window where I stood. I did not move. I did not breathe. He stared for 3 long seconds. Then he turned away, put the car in gear, and drove off. The taillights disappeared around the bend, and the driveway was empty again. I picked up my phone and called Harlow. He was here, I said. He checked the sugar house. He did not find anything, but he is nervous. I could see it. Good. Nervous people make mistakes. Harlow's voice was calm and steady through the line. Stay in character, Maggie. 3 more days. Can you hold on? I looked out the window at the sugar house, at the snow falling over the maple grove, at the place where my husband had been murdered by the man who just handed me a bottle of wine and called me Mom. 3 more days, I said. I can hold on. But after I hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a long time with my hands flat on the counter, breathing hard. My daughter's husband had stood in the room where he killed my husband and told me it should be torn down. He had smiled at me and called me Mom and suggested I sell the land Thomas had given his life to protect. And I had smiled back. I had thanked him for the wine. I had played the part of the tired old woman who did not know anything and did not suspect anything, and would simply fold once there was no one left to fight. Inside, I was counting the hours. The white van arrived at 8 the next morning. No logo, no markings, nothing to suggest it belonged to anyone other than a repairman making a house call. Harlow stepped out first, dressed in civilian clothes, a heavy canvas jacket, and work boots. Behind him came a young man carrying 2 black equipment cases. Officer Danny Webb, 26, red hair, nervous hands that kept adjusting his glasses. Mrs. Sullivan, Webb said, shaking my hand. His palm was damp. We will have everything installed in about 2 hours. I led them to the sugar house. The door groaned open and we stepped inside. The air was cold and still, heavy with the smell of old maple and dried wood. Stainless steel evaporator pans lined one wall. Buckets and tubing hung from hooks. The loft where Thomas had been working when he died was still partially repaired. The new beams he had installed standing clean and pale against the dark old timber. Webb worked quickly. He climbed a ladder and placed the first camera in the shadows of the rafters, a device no bigger than a coat button. I watched him drill a tiny hole, feed a wire, and secure it so well that I could not find it even knowing where to look. The second camera went on the beam facing the door. The third behind a stack of old crates near the window. 2 microphones followed, one in the rafters and one tucked behind the evaporator. When he finished, Harlow pulled out a tablet and showed me the feed. 4 angles of the sugar house interior, all sharp and clear. He tapped the screen, and I heard my own breathing come through the speakers, amplified and strange. Perfect, Harlow said. He reached into his jacket and handed me 2 things. A device smaller than a shirt button, attached to a thin wire, and a battery pack the size of a deck of cards, and a tiny flesh-colored earpiece. The wire clips here. He pointed to the center of my chest. Battery goes in your back pocket. It broadcasts everything you say and hear. Range is 1/2 mile. The earpiece lets me talk to you. When you need us, say the code phrase. Thomas deserves to rest in peace. We come through that door in 30 seconds. I held the wire in my palm. It weighed almost nothing, but it felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. One more thing. Harlow went to the van and returned with a shotgun. A Remington, well-oiled, the stock worn smooth from years of use. He placed it behind a stack of wooden crates in the far corner of the sugar house. 3 steps from where you will be standing. If things go wrong before we can reach you, you use this. Aim low. We want everyone alive. I looked at the gun. I have not fired one in 15 years. I hope you will not need to fire one tonight. But I would rather you have it. I nodded. We went back to the house. Harlow and Webb drove away in the unmarked van. I stood in the kitchen and watched the sugar house through the window. 3 cameras, 2 microphones, a shotgun, and a wire the size of a button. Tomorrow night, that building would become a trap, and I would be the bait. Ryan came home at 6:30. I heard his truck, heard the door, heard his boots on the porch steps. He came in carrying his thermos and lunch bag, still wearing his work jacket. His face was tired but peaceful. He had spent the day checking sap lines in the East Grove, doing the work Thomas had taught him, the work that kept this farm alive. He had no idea what I was about to tell him. "Hey, Mom," he said. Then he saw my face. "What is wrong?" "Sit down, Ryan." He sat slowly, setting his things on the table. I could see confusion in his eyes, the beginning of worry. I took a breath and told him everything. The night I saw Jessica and Kevin, at 2 in the morning, the basement, the cabin, Thomas's notebook, and the USB video, Dorothy Chen, the scaffolding diagram, the torn page with Thomas's final words, the meeting with Harlow, the wire I would wear tomorrow night, the code phrase. The camera's already hidden in the sugar house. Ryan listened without moving. His face went white, then red, then white again. His hands gripped the edge of the table so hard, his knuckles looked like bare bone. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then Ryan stood up and drove his fist into the wall beside the refrigerator. The drywall cracked. Blood appeared on his knuckles, bright against his skin. "Ryan, he killed Dad." His voice broke on the words. "Kevin killed Dad, and Jessica let him steal our land. And they let us believe it was just an accident. They stood at his funeral and cried, and it was all a lie." "Yes." He sank back into the chair and put his head in his hands. His shoulders shook. I reached across the table and gripped his wrist. His pulse hammered under my fingers. Then he looked up. His eyes were red and swollen. "There is something I need to tell you." My stomach dropped. "What?" "Last month, Kevin called me. He said the heating system in the sugar house needed checking and asked if I could leave the spare key under the mat for him. He said he would stop by on his way through town." Ryan's voice was barely a whisper. "I did it, Mom. I left the key for him. I did not think anything of it. He said he was helping." I stared at my son. The spare key. That was how Kevin had been getting into the sugar house. That was how he had accessed the property without my knowledge. I gave him the key. Ryan's face crumpled. I helped him. I did not know what he was doing. But I gave him the key, and he used it to come onto our property and steal from us and cover his tracks. If I had not given him that key, maybe none of this would have happened. "Ryan, listen to me." I tightened my grip on his wrist. "Kevin killed your father. You trusted family. That is not a crime. That is love. Do not carry his sin on your shoulders." He wiped his face with the back of his hand. "I want to be there tomorrow night. I want to be in that sugar house when you confront them." "No, Mom. If something goes wrong, if Kevin realizes what is happening and things turn dangerous, I need you safe. Autumn and Mason, Jessica's children, they have already lost their grandfather. If something happens to me, they cannot lose everyone. They will need you." Ryan stared at me. "Do not talk like that. Promise me you will stay in the house." He did not answer for a long time. Then, slowly, he nodded. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The wire sat on the nightstand beside Thomas's reading glasses. Tomorrow was the 30th. Tomorrow, I would stand in the sugar house where my husband was murdered and wait for my daughter to walk through the door. I turned to the empty side of the bed, Thomas's side. I put my hand on the cold sheet. I am scared, I whispered. But I am not going to stop. I woke before dawn on November 29th, the last day before everything changed. I lay in bed listening to the silence, watching the first gray light seep through the curtains. Then I got up, dressed in layers, pulled on my heaviest coat, and stepped outside. The morning air cut into my face like a blade. Frost coated every surface. The porch railing, the truck windshield, the bare branches of the maples along the drive. My breath came out in white clouds that vanished before they reached my waist. I walked toward the grove. The trail was familiar as my own heartbeat. I had walked it 10,000 times in 47 years. In spring with mud sucking at my boots and the sound of sap dripping into buckets. In summer with Thomas beside me, his hand brushing mine as we talked about nothing and everything. In autumn with the canopy blazing red and gold above us, so bright it hurt to look at. And now in late November, with the trees stripped down to their bones and the sky the color of old iron, the cabin sat where it always sat, small and solid among the bare trunks. I did not go inside. I just stood in front of it with my hands in my pockets, looking at the door Thomas had built with wood he milled himself, at the window where we used to watch the sunrise together. 47 years. We were married on a Tuesday afternoon in June, 1978, at the town clerk's office in Stowe. Thomas wore his father's suit. I wore a white dress my mother sewed by hand. There were 6 people in the room, including the justice of the peace. After the ceremony, we drove straight back to the farm, and Thomas carried me across the threshold of this cabin because the house was still being renovated, and this was the only finished building on the property. We spent our wedding night on a mattress on the floor with the window open, listening to the peepers in the pond and the wind in the maples. Thomas turned to me in the dark and said, "We are going to build something here, Maggie. Something that lasts." And we did. For 47 years, we did. I wiped my eyes and walked back to the house. There was coffee to make and a role to play. Kevin arrived at 11. He came alone again. Same black SUV. Same polished boots. Same easy smile. This time he brought sandwiches from a deli in Burlington wrapped in brown paper, the kind of gesture designed to look thoughtful without requiring any actual thought. "Brought lunch," he said, setting the bag on the counter. "Turkey and Swiss. Your favorite, right?" It was not my favorite. Thomas's favorite had been turkey and Swiss. Mine was roast beef. But I smiled and said thank you, because that was what the tired old woman who did not know anything would say. We ate at the kitchen table. Kevin talked about the drive-up, about traffic on the interstate, about a new restaurant opening in Stowe. Normal things. Safe things. But every few minutes his eyes would drift to the window, toward the sugar house, and his jaw would tighten just slightly before he caught himself and smiled again. "You know, Mom, Jessica and I were talking. We think it might be nice to do a family dinner here tomorrow night. All of us. She is bringing a couple of friends who are interested in seeing the property. Business associates, Randall Holt and Christine Novak. They were coming tomorrow. All 4 of them. Walking straight into the trap." "That sounds wonderful," I said. "It has been too long since we had a full table." Kevin studied me for a moment. His eyes were sharp and searching, the way a dog looks at a closed gate, trying to find the weakness. Then he nodded, and the smile returned. "Great. We will be here around 11, maybe 11:30, at night," I thought. Not for dinner. 11:30 at night. After Kevin left, I watched from the window as his SUV idled at the end of the driveway. He was on the phone again. His body was tense, his mouth moving fast. He glanced back at the house once, twice, then pulled onto the road and was gone. I called Harlow. "Tomorrow night, 11:30. All 4 of them. We will be in position by 10. You will not see us, but we will be there. The afternoon passed slowly. I washed dishes. I folded laundry. I moved through the house like a ghost, touching things Thomas had touched, sitting in chairs where he used to sit. At 4 o'clock, when the light was turning gold and the shadows were growing long, I put on my coat and walked to his grave. Thomas was buried beneath the oldest maple on the property, a tree that had been standing since before his grandfather was born. The headstone was simple, gray granite, his name, the years of his life, and a line I had chosen from a poem he loved. The roots go deep, and the branches hold. I knelt in the snow. It soaked through my jeans immediately, but I did not care. I put my hand on the cold stone and spoke to him the way I had been speaking to him for 9 months, in whispers that no one else could hear. Tomorrow night, Thomas, I will make him answer for what he did to you. I will stand in the sugar house where you died, and I will look him in the face, and I will not be afraid. The wind moved through the old maple above me, making the bare branches creak and whisper. I found your notebook. I found the video. I read your last words. You told me to protect Ryan. I will. You told me Jessica did not know. I believe you. But she still has to answer for what she did. And Kevin has to answer for what he did to you. I pressed my forehead against the stone. It was so cold it burned. I miss you every single day. Every morning I wake up and reach for you before I remember. Every evening I sit at the table and look at your empty chair and forget how to breathe. The tears came then, hot against my frozen skin. I let them fall. Wait for me a little longer. I am not done yet. I walked back to the house as the last light drained from the sky. Ryan was in the kitchen. He had made soup. We ate in silence, neither of us tasting anything. At 9 o'clock, I went to my room and picked up the wire from the nightstand. I clipped it under my shirt the way Harlow had shown me. Press the button. Testing, I whispered. Harlow's voice came through the earpiece. Clear and steady. Loud and clear. Maggie, we are ready when you are. I looked at myself in the bedroom mirror. A 69-year-old woman in a flannel shirt with a recording device taped to her chest and fear in her eyes. Tomorrow, I said. Then I turned off the light and lay down in the dark, one hand on Thomas's side of the bed, and waited for the longest night of my life to begin. The sugar house was colder than the world outside. I stood in the center of the room at 11 o'clock, my breath coming out in clouds that drifted up toward the rafters where the cameras watched in silence. The wire was warm against my chest. The earpiece sat snug in my left ear. I could hear Harlow breathing on the other end, steady and calm, a metronome of reassurance in the dark. We are in position, he said quietly. 4 officers. Northeast tree line, 100 yards out. You are not alone, Maggie. But I felt alone. The sugar house smelled the way it always smelled. Maple and old wood, and the faint metallic tang of the evaporator pans. Moonlight came through the gaps in the walls, cutting the darkness into thin, bright lines on the floor. Shadows hung from the ceiling like curtains. The loft where Thomas had been working the day he died was directly above me. The new beams he had installed, still pale against the old dark timber. I looked at the spot on the floor where Ryan had found him. They had cleaned the blood, but I could still see the faint discoloration in the concrete. A shadow that would not come out no matter how hard anyone scrubbed. I had not stood on this spot since the day Thomas died. Now here I was, 9 months later, wearing a wire and waiting for the people who killed him to walk through the door. The shotgun was behind the stack of wooden crates in the far corner. 3 steps. I had measured it twice. I hoped I would not need to take those steps. At 11:20, I heard the first engine. Distant at first, then growing closer. Tires on frozen gravel. My heart began to pound so hard I could feel it in my throat. A second engine followed. Lower and heavier. Headlights swept across the walls, then went dark. Car doors opened and closed. Voices, low and tight. Footsteps crunching through snow toward the door. I moved to the center of the room, directly beneath the beam where Webb had installed the main camera. I wanted them to see me clearly. I wanted every word recorded. The door swung open. Kevin entered first, carrying a flashlight. The beam swept the room and stopped on my face. He froze. For one full second, the mask slipped. I saw surprise, then fear, then something cold and calculating slide back into place. "Mom." His voice was careful. "What are you doing out here?" "Waiting for you," I said. Behind him, Jessica stepped through the door. She was wearing a dark coat, her hair pulled back, her face pale in the flashlight glow. Her eyes went wide when she saw me. "Mom, what is going on?" Two more figures followed. A man in his mid-50s, tall, silver-haired, wearing a cashmere overcoat that had no business being in a Vermont sugar house in November. Randall Holt. I recognized him from the video. Beside him was a woman, late 40s, dark hair, sharp features drawn tight with anxiety. Christine Novak, the attorney who had forged my signature. Kevin closed the door behind them. The thud echoed through the space. He scanned the room, his eyes moving across the walls, the rafters, the dark corners. Looking for what? I did not know, but he did not find anything. Webb had done his job well. "This is a surprise," Kevin said, forcing a smile. "We were just coming to pick up some documents Jessica left in the storage area last time we were here. Nothing important. Nothing important." I repeated his words back to him. Flat and quiet. Then I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the leather notebook. Thomas's notebook. Kevin's smile faded. "Do you know what this is?" I held it up so all four of them could see it. "This is my husband's handwriting. His notes. Dated entries going back more than a year. He documented everything." Silence. Christine shifted on her feet. Randall's jaw tightened. Jessica stared at the notebook, her face draining of color. I opened to a page I had marked with a folded corner. November 15th, 2024. Greenfield Enterprises Development Proposal. 30 acres, resort and spa complex. Our land. I looked at Randall. "Your company, Mr. Holt." Randall raised both hands, palms out, his voice smooth and practiced. "Mrs. Sullivan, I do not know what your husband wrote in that notebook, but I can assure you this is simply a business arrangement, a mutually beneficial opportunity for your family, mutually beneficial." I turned to another page. January 8th, 2025. Christine Novak filed transfer documents for the East parcel. Maggie's signature on the authorization form. But Maggie did not sign anything. "It is a forgery." Christine's face went white. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I looked at Jessica, my daughter, standing in the room where her father died, wearing guilt on her face, the way other women wore jewelry. "Mom," she said, her voice cracking. "I can explain. We needed the money. Kevin's company was in trouble. The debts were crushing us. I thought if we could just sell the development rights, nobody would get hurt. You would still have the house, the core of the farm. I was going to tell you eventually, I swear. You forged my signature, Jessica. You sold your father's land behind my back." Tears spilled down her cheeks. I know it was wrong. But we were desperate. Desperate. The word tasted like ashes. I looked at Kevin. He was standing near the door, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Watching. Calculating. Waiting to see how much I knew. I reached into my other pocket and pulled out the rolled paper. The scaffolding diagram. Thomas's precise hand. Every beam labeled, every bolt numbered, and in the corner, circled in red ink, the words that changed everything. "But that is not why I am here tonight," I said. I unrolled the diagram and held it up. Bolts checked November 2nd. All secure. The room went still. Kevin's arms uncrossed. His hands dropped to his sides. And for the first time since I had known him, I saw real fear in his eyes. Kevin stared at the diagram in my hands. The fear was there for only a moment, a crack in the mask, before he pulled himself together and forced his voice into something resembling calm. I do not know what that is supposed to prove. Old buildings fall apart. That is what the investigators concluded. Thomas checked every bolt on November 2nd, I said. He drew this diagram himself. He numbered each one and confirmed they were secure. The next morning, you were seen at this sugar house, alone, for 2 hours. And the day after that, my husband was dead. Who told you that? That old woman next door? Kevin shook his head. She is senile. She does not know what she saw. Dorothy Chen spent 40 years in an emergency room. She knows exactly what she saw. I set the diagram on the evaporator pan beside me and pulled out my phone. But she is not the only evidence I have. I pressed play. The video filled the small screen, shaky and washed out, filmed through a windshield. But Kevin's face was clear. His voice was clear. And Randall Holt's voice coming through the phone on the dashboard was clear enough. Kevin's recorded voice filled the sugar house. The timeline works. We close in April, after the snow melts. Novak has the paperwork ready. Jessica is on board. Then Holt's voice. And the old man? And Kevin again, leaning back in his seat, relaxed and confident. Once the old man is out of the picture, we close the deal. Jessica will handle her mother. I stopped the video. The silence that followed was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The only sound was the wind pressing against the walls outside. Randall spoke first. He turned on Kevin, his composure cracking like thin ice. You told me it was an accident. You said the old man fell on his own. You said nobody would get hurt. Christine's voice came out high and shaking. I never agreed to anything involving violence. I signed the paperwork because you said it was a clean deal. You never said anything about anyone getting hurt. Kevin held up his hands. Everyone calm down. This is a misunderstanding. That video is out of context. When I said out of the picture, I meant once he agreed to sell. That is all. Then explain the bolts, I said. My voice was steady. I did not know where the steadiness came from, but it was there, solid as stone beneath my feet. Explain how a scaffold that my husband checked and confirmed secure on November 2nd collapsed on November 4th. Explain why you were in this building alone for 2 hours on the morning between those two dates. Kevin's mouth opened, then closed. His eyes darted to the door, then to Randall, then to Christine, then back to me. He was trapped, and he knew it. Randall took a step away from Kevin. I want no part of this. The land deal was business. I had nothing to do with whatever happened to that man. You paid for it, I said. $7.2 million. That was the price of my husband's life and my family's land. I did not know anyone was going to die. But you knew the signatures were forged. You knew the owner had not consented. And you moved forward anyway. Randall said nothing. His face was gray. I turned back to Kevin. Tell me the truth. Right now. In this room where my husband took his last breath. Tell me what you did. Something broke in him then. Maybe it was the weight of 4 people staring at him. Maybe it was the knowledge that the walls were closing in. Maybe it was the fact that he was standing on the exact spot where Thomas had died. And even a man like Kevin could not escape the gravity of that. The old man found the documents, Kevin said. His voice was low, strained, like the words were being pulled from him against his will. He found everything. He was going to the police. He was going to destroy the deal, the company, everything we had built. I tried to talk to him, but he would not listen. So you killed him, I said. Kevin closed his eyes. I loosened the bolts. 2 of them. On the main support beam. I knew he would be working up there the next morning. I thought the scaffold would just shift, scare him, maybe break his leg. I did not think the whole beam would come down. I did not mean for it to go that far, but it did. Yes. His voice cracked. It did. The sound that came from behind me was not a word. It was something more primal than language. A scream that started in the gut and tore its way out through the throat like an animal clawing free from a cage. Jessica. She had been standing near the wall, silent through the entire confrontation, her face white, her eyes moving between me and Kevin. But now she lunged forward, her body shaking, her fists clenched at her sides, tears pouring down her face. "You killed my father?" The words ripped through the sugar house like a physical force. "You told me he fell. You stood at his funeral and held my hand. And you killed him?" Kevin reached for her. "Jess, listen to me. I did it for us. For our family. For Autumn. And Mason. He was my family." She shoved him so hard he stumbled backward into the evaporator. "He was my father. He taught me to ride a bike. He walked me down the aisle at our wedding. Your wedding. And you murdered him. And let me believe it was an accident for 9 months." Jessica collapsed to the floor. Her knees hit the concrete hard. She wrapped her arms around herself and rocked, sobbing so violently, her whole body convulsed. The sound filled the room, raw and broken and terrible. It was the sound of a woman discovering that the man she shared a bed with every night had murdered the man who gave her life. Thomas had been right. Jessica did not know. Until this very moment, standing in the room where her father died, she had not known. Kevin's hand moved to his jacket. I saw the outline of metal through the fabric. Randall stepped backward. Christine screamed. Kevin pulled a black handgun free and held it at his side. His hand shaking. His face twisted between rage and desperation. "Nobody is leaving this room," he said. "Give me the phone. Give me the notebook. We can still fix this." I looked at the gun. I looked at Kevin. I looked at my daughter on the floor, broken and sobbing. Then I looked straight into the camera hidden in the rafters, and I spoke the words my husband had waited 9 months to hear. "Thomas deserves to rest in peace." The door of the sugar house exploded inward. Detective James Harlow came through first, his badge raised high in his left hand and his service weapon drawn in his right. Behind him came 4 Vermont State police officers in full tactical gear, their boots cracking against the frozen ground like gunshots. The red and blue lights from their vehicles cut through the darkness outside, painting the sugar house walls in flashing color. Vermont State Police. "Nobody move." Harlow's voice filled the room like thunder. Kevin still held the handgun, his arm trembling, his eyes darting between the officers and the door. For 3 seconds that felt like 3 years. Nobody breathed. I stood perfectly still, my hand pressed flat against the workbench behind me. I could feel the wire against my chest, still transmitting, still recording every word and every heartbeat. "Put the weapon down, Kevin," Harlow said. His voice dropped low, calm but absolute. "There is nowhere to go. We have everything." Kevin's face twisted. Sweat rolled down his temple despite the freezing air. He looked at Jessica, who was crumpled on the floor, her shoulders shaking with sobs so deep they made no sound. He looked at Randall Holt, who had already raised both hands above his head, his expensive coat dusted with sawdust from backing into the evaporator. Christine Novak stood frozen near the far wall, her leather briefcase clutched to her chest like a shield. Then Kevin looked at me. "I have seen many things in 69 years. I have seen storms strip the bark from maple trees. I have seen a grown man weep when his child took her first steps. I have seen my husband's casket lowered into frozen ground. But I had never seen what I saw in Kevin's eyes at that moment. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was the look of a man who finally understood that the lie he had built his life upon was collapsing, and there was nothing left to hold on to. He lowered the gun. Officer Danny Webb rushed forward, kicked the weapon away, and forced Kevin to his knees. The handcuffs clicked shut, with a sound that echoed off the metal walls. Kevin did not resist. He did not speak. He simply knelt on the cold concrete floor of the sugar house where my husband had boiled sap for 47 years, and he stared at nothing. Harlow moved to Randall Holt next. Randall James Holt, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, land theft, and accessory to murder. Holt's face drained of color. He opened his mouth to protest, but Harlow continued reading his rights in that same steady, unwavering tone. A second officer guided Holt's hands behind his back and secured the cuffs. Christine Novak dropped her briefcase. Papers scattered across the floor, legal documents and transfer agreements that meant nothing now. She was crying, mascara streaking her cheeks. "I want a lawyer," she said, her voice cracking. "I want my own lawyer." An officer cuffed her gently but firmly and led her toward the door. Then there was Jessica. My daughter lay curled on the floor, her arms wrapped around herself, rocking back and forth. A female officer knelt beside her and spoke softly. Jessica looked up at me with eyes so broken, so utterly shattered, that I felt my own knees buckle. She reached one hand toward me, her fingers trembling. "Mom," she whispered. "Mom, I did not know. I swear, I did not know he killed Dad. I swear on my children, I wanted to go to her." Every nerve in my body screamed at me to cross that floor, to kneel beside her, to hold her the way I held her when she was 5 years old and afraid of the dark. But my feet would not move. My mind understood what my heart refused to accept. She had signed the papers. She had helped sell the land. She had stood in this very room and watched her husband drag locked crates filled with documents that would erase our family's legacy. She did not know about the murder. I believed that. But she knew about the betrayal. The female officer helped Jessica to her feet. "Jessica Marie Dalton, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and forgery." Jessica's body went limp. They had to hold her upright as they guided her toward the door. As she passed me, she stopped. The officer paused, allowing her one moment. Jessica looked at me, her face swollen and red, tears still falling. "I am sorry, Mom," she said. "I am so sorry." I opened my mouth, but no words came. She was led outside into the flashing lights and the bitter November cold. I stood alone in the sugar house. The cameras were still recording. The microphones were still listening. The evidence bags were being filled. Officers photographed every surface, every corner, every scratch on the floor. Harlow approached me with a wool blanket and draped it over my shoulders. "You did it, Maggie," he said quietly. "Thomas would be proud." I shook my head. "Thomas would be heartbroken," I said. "Just like me." Harlow nodded. He did not argue. He simply stood beside me while his team worked. At 12:45 in the morning, headlights swept across the yard. Ryan's truck pulled up fast, gravel spraying. He jumped out and ran toward me, his face wild with panic. He had heard nothing. I had told him to stay home, to stay safe, to be ready for whatever came next. But Ryan was his father's son. He could not sit still when his family was burning. He grabbed my arms and searched my face. "Mom, are you hurt? Are you okay?" I looked at my son. His hands were shaking. His breath came in clouds of white vapor. Behind him, I could see the officers loading Kevin into the back of a patrol car. Randall Holt was already inside a second vehicle. Christine Novak sat in a third, her head bowed. And Jessica, my daughter, my little girl who used to press maple leaves into books and name every tree in the grove, sat in the back of a fourth car, her forehead resting against the window. "No," I said to Ryan. "I am not okay. But it is done." Ryan pulled me into his arms. I let him hold me. I let myself shake. I let the tears come. Finally, after days of holding them behind a mask that I never wanted to wear, the sugar house lights blazed behind us. The snow began to fall again, soft and steady, covering the tire tracks and the footprints. and the place where my family had come apart. Harlow approached us one final time. "We will need your full statement tomorrow morning at the station," he said. "Get some rest tonight if you can." Rest. As if rest were possible. As if sleep could find a woman who had just watched her daughter carried away in handcuffs. Ryan drove me home. The farmhouse was dark, except for the kitchen light I had left on. I sat at the table where Thomas and I had shared 10,000 meals, and I stared at the chair where he used to sit. The wire was still clipped inside my shirt. I reached in and pulled it out, set it on the table beside my cold cup of tea. The house was silent. The arrest was over. The truth was out. But the hardest part, I knew, had not even begun. The story broke on December 2nd. A reporter from the Burlington Free Press called the house at 7:15 in the morning. Ryan answered and hung up without a word. By noon, the story was everywhere. The headline read, "Vermont Maple Farm Family Arrested in Multi-Million-Dollar Land Fraud and Murder Conspiracy." Every local station carried it. By evening, the national networks picked it up. A CNN anchor called it a story of betrayal that reads like a novel. They had no idea. I did not watch the coverage. Ryan unplugged the television in the living room and turned off the radio in the kitchen. But the phone kept ringing. Neighbors called. Old friends called. People I had not spoken to in 20 years called. Some offered sympathy. Some asked questions that felt like knives. Martha Aldridge from the church asked me if I had known all along. I hung up on her. It was the first time in my life I had ever hung up on anyone. Frank Prescott came to the house that afternoon with a folder of documents. He sat at the kitchen table and explained what would happen next. The grand jury had already convened. Indictments were expected within the week. Kevin would face first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, land theft, and forgery. Randall Holt would face conspiracy, fraud, and accessory after the fact. Christine Novak would face fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. And Jessica, my Jessica, she would face conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and theft of property. Not murder. Not accessory to murder. Harlow had reviewed the evidence 3 times and confirmed that nothing connected Jessica to the killing of Thomas. "That is the one thing I can give you," Frank said. "She was not part of the murder." I nodded but could not speak. It was a small mercy in a sea of wreckage. The trial began on February 10th, 2026, at the Chittenden County Superior Court in Burlington. I drove there with Ryan. Neither of us spoke during the 40-minute drive. The courthouse was a large stone building with tall windows and an American flag hanging motionless in the frozen air. Television crews lined the sidewalk. Cameras flashed when I stepped out of the truck. A reporter shoved a microphone toward my face and asked how it felt to testify against my own daughter. Ryan put his arm around my shoulder and guided me through the doors. The courtroom smelled like old wood and floor polish. The benches were packed. I recognized Dorothy Chen in the 3rd row. She wore her good blue coat and gave me a single firm nod. Frank sat beside me at the front, behind the prosecution table. Assistant State Attorney Rebecca Hollis led the case. She was young, maybe 35, with sharp eyes and a voice that carried without effort. Kevin's trial came first. The prosecution presented Thomas's notebook, the USB video, the scaffold diagram, Dorothy Chen's testimony, and the wire recording from the sugar house. Kevin's defense attorney, a man named Garrison Burke from Boston, argued that the video was ambiguous and that Kevin's confession was made under duress. But the jury heard Kevin's own voice saying, "Once the old man is out of the picture, we close the deal." They heard him admit to loosening the bolts. They watched the video 3 times. I took the stand on February 14th, Valentine's Day. The irony was not lost on me. I told the court everything. I described the sound of boots on frozen gravel at 2 in the morning. I described the locked crate, the basement, the notebook, the cabin, the USB drive, the scaffold diagram, Dorothy's visit, the meeting with Frank and Harlow, the wire, And the night in the sugar house. I spoke for 2 hours and 11 minutes. I did not cry. I had decided before I entered the courtroom that I would not cry. Thomas deserved better than tears. He deserved the truth, delivered clearly and without apology. Garrison Burke cross-examined me for 40 minutes. He asked if I had manipulated the evidence. He asked if I had coached Dorothy Chen. He asked if I had a financial motive to frame Kevin. I answered every question with the same steady voice I had used for 31 years in my classroom. When he asked if I hated my son-in-law, I paused. I looked at Kevin, who sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, his wrists chained. He did not look back. I do not hate Kevin, I said. I hate what he did. There is a difference. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. On February 19th, they returned their verdict. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder, conspiracy, fraud, forgery, land theft. Kevin received 25 years to life with no possibility of parole for 20 years. He showed no emotion when the judge read the sentence. He simply stared at the table in front of him as if he had already left the room. Randall Holt pleaded guilty before his trial began. His attorney negotiated a deal. 12 years for conspiracy and fraud, with the possibility of parole after 8. He agreed to return all proceeds from the land deal and to testify against any remaining associates. Christine Novak also pleaded guilty. She received 6 years for forgery and conspiracy, with parole eligibility after 4. She lost her law license permanently. Jessica's trial began on March 9th. It lasted 4 days. She pleaded not guilty to the murder-related charges, but guilty to conspiracy, fraud, and forgery. The prosecution accepted the plea. Rebecca Hollis told the judge that the evidence supported Jessica's claim that she did not know about the murder. Harlow confirmed this in his testimony. I did not testify at Jessica's trial. Frank advised against it, and I agreed. I could not sit in that chair and speak against my own daughter twice. Once was enough to last a lifetime. Jessica was sentenced to 8 years. The judge, a woman named Catherine Rowe, spoke directly to her before announcing the sentence. You participated in the theft of your family's legacy, Judge Rowe said. You forged documents to sell land that belonged to your mother. You may not have known about the murder, but your actions enabled the circumstances that led to your father's death. The court cannot ignore that. Jessica stood in her orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back, her face pale and thin. She turned to look at me in the gallery. I held her gaze. I did not nod. I did not shake my head. I simply looked at her, mother to daughter, and let her see whatever she needed to see in my eyes. They took her away through a side door. The courtroom cleared. Ryan drove me home in silence. The snow had melted by then. March in Vermont is a slow, ugly thaw, the kind that reveals everything the winter tried to hide. Dead leaves, broken branches, the raw brown earth beneath. I sat at the kitchen table that night with a cup of chamomile tea that I did not drink. The house was quiet. The trials were over. The sentences were handed down. Justice, whatever that word truly means, had been served. But the kitchen chair across from me was still empty. Thomas was still gone. Jessica was behind bars. And 2 children, Autumn and Mason, were waiting for someone to tell them that the world had not ended. I picked up the phone and called Child Protective Services. The social worker's name was Linda Ferraro. She was a small woman with short gray hair and kind eyes hidden behind wire-rimmed glasses. She arrived at the farmhouse on March 15th with a folder of paperwork and 2 children standing behind her on the porch. Autumn was 10. She had her mother's dark brown hair and her grandfather's jaw, the same square, stubborn line that Thomas carried his whole life. She stood straight, her backpack strapped tight over both shoulders, her eyes scanning the farmhouse like she was memorizing every detail in case she needed to leave again. She did not smile. She did not speak. She simply stood there. A child pretending to be older than the world had any right to ask her to be. Mason was 8. He held his sister's hand. His blonde hair was uncombed, and his jacket was zipped crookedly, one side higher than the other. He looked up at me with Thomas's blue eyes, and something inside my chest cracked open like ice on a spring river. "Hi, Grandma," Mason said. 2 words. That was all it took. I knelt on the porch and opened my arms. Mason came to me immediately, burying his face against my shoulder. Autumn did not move. She watched us with an expression that I recognized because I had worn it myself for the past 4 months. It was the look of someone who had been broken and was not yet sure it was safe to feel anything. "Come inside," I said. "There is hot chocolate on the stove." Linda stayed for an hour. She explained the temporary custody arrangement, the required home visits, the court hearing scheduled for April 7th, where a judge would review the permanent placement. She asked about the bedrooms, the school district, the nearest pediatrician. I answered every question. Ryan had spent the previous week preparing the upstairs. He had painted the small bedroom at the end of the hall a soft yellow for Mason and arranged the larger bedroom beside it with a desk and bookshelf for Autumn. He bought new sheets and pillows and placed a small lamp shaped like a maple leaf on each nightstand. After Linda left, I showed the children their rooms. Mason ran his hand over the maple leaf lamp and whispered, "Cool." Autumn set her backpack on the floor, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the wall. I sat beside her. I did not speak. I did not touch her. I simply sat there, the way Thomas used to sit beside me when I was upset, offering nothing but presence. After a long time, Autumn said, "Is Mom coming back?" "Yes," I said, "but not for a while." "How long?" "A few years." Autumn pressed her lips together. She nodded once, slowly, and then turned to the window. Outside, the last of the snow was melting off the roof of the sugar house. The first weeks were difficult in ways I had not anticipated. Mason adjusted faster. He explored the farm with the curiosity of a boy discovering a new planet. He followed Ryan to the sugar house every morning, asked questions about the evaporator, tasted raw sap straight from the bucket, and declared it not sweet enough. Ryan laughed for the first time since November. Autumn was quieter. She went to school, completed her homework, ate her meals, and returned to her room. She spoke when spoken to, but volunteered nothing. The school counselor, a young woman named Patricia Hale, called me after the second week. She said Autumn had been sitting alone at lunch. Some children had been asking questions. A boy in her class had told her that her father was a murderer. Autumn had not responded. She had simply picked up her tray, walked to the library, and eaten alone between the shelves. I drove to the school the next morning. I met with the principal, Dr. Howard Lamb, and Patricia Hale. I told them what the children had been through. I asked them to protect my granddaughter. Dr. Lamb promised increased supervision and moved Autumn to a different lunch period. Patricia began weekly counseling sessions. That night I found Autumn at the kitchen table with a sheet of paper and a set of colored pencils I had bought at the general store. She was drawing something. I poured 2 glasses of milk and set one beside her without a word. I sat across from her and pretended to read the newspaper. After 10 minutes, she slid the paper across the table. It was a drawing of a tree. A large maple tree with deep roots spreading wide beneath the ground. The trunk was thick and brown. The branches reached upward, covered in green and gold and red leaves. At the base of the trunk, she had drawn 4 small figures standing in a row. A tall woman with white hair, a man with broad shoulders, a girl with a backpack, and a small boy holding someone's hand. Beneath the drawing, in careful handwriting, she had written, "Our family tree." I stared at that drawing for a long time. The leaves blurred. The figures blurred. Everything blurred because the tears I had been holding since March came all at once, quiet and warm, falling onto the table beside my untouched glass of milk. "It is beautiful, Autumn," I said. She did not smile, but something shifted in her face. A loosening, a tiny crack in the wall she had built around herself. She picked up a red pencil and added one more leaf to the highest branch. Christmas came on a Wednesday. Ryan cut a tree from the back of the property, a 6-foot balsam fir that filled the living room with the smell of pine. Mason decorated the lower branches with ornaments he found in the attic, old glass balls and wooden figurines that Thomas had carved decades ago. Autumn placed the star on top. She needed a step stool, and Ryan held it steady while she reached. I cooked the dinner Thomas always loved: roast turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce from scratch, and maple walnut pie. We sat at the table, 4 of us now, and I said grace for the first time in years. I thanked God for the food, for the children, for Ryan, and for Thomas, who I believed was watching from wherever good men go when they leave this earth. Mason asked if he could have seconds on pie. Autumn asked if she could keep one of Thomas's wooden ornaments in her room. Ryan cleared the dishes without being asked. That night, after the children were asleep, I sat on the porch in Thomas's rocking chair. The air was sharp and cold. Stars filled the sky above the maple grove. Inside, the tree lights glowed through the window, red and gold and white. I could hear the house settle around the sleeping children, the old wood creaking like a heartbeat. For the first time since November, the farmhouse felt like a home again. Wounded and changed, and missing the people who should have been there, but alive, still standing, the roots holding firm beneath the frozen ground. I rocked slowly in the chair and whispered into the dark, "They are safe, Thomas. Your grandchildren are safe." The wind moved through the bare maples and carried my words into the night. The first letter arrived on April 3rd. I found it in the mailbox between an electric bill and a seed catalog. The envelope was plain white, stamped with the seal of the Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility. My name and address were written in Jessica's handwriting, the same looping cursive she had learned in my 3rd grade classroom 27 years ago. I stood at the end of the driveway holding that envelope for a long time. The wind tugged at its edges. My fingers trembled. And it was not from the cold. I brought it inside but did not open it. I placed it on the kitchen counter beside the fruit bowl and went about my morning. I made oatmeal for Mason. I braided Autumn's hair for school. I packed their lunches, turkey sandwiches with apple slices, and a note in each bag that said, "Have a good day, because that is what grandmothers do." Ryan drove them to school in his truck. I washed the dishes. I wiped the counter. I swept the floor, and then I sat down, picked up the envelope, and slid my thumb beneath the seal. The letter was 3 pages, front and back. Written on lined paper. "Dear Mom," it began. "I do not know if you will read this. I would understand if you did not. But I need to write it anyway, because if I do not, the silence will eat me alive." Jessica wrote about the first days in prison. She described her cell, 6 feet by 9 feet. A metal bed, a thin mattress, a toilet with no lid. She described the sounds, doors slamming at all hours, voices echoing down concrete hallways, someone crying every night in the cell beside hers. She described the food: cold oatmeal in the morning, a sandwich at noon, something gray and warm in the evening that she could not identify. She wrote about Kevin. She said she had not spoken to him since the arrest. She said she did not want to. She said she had replayed every conversation, every late-night phone call, every time he told her the land deal was just business and that Thomas would come around eventually. She said she believed him because she wanted to believe him, because the debts were drowning them, because she was afraid of losing the house, the car, the life she had built on a foundation that turned out to be sand. "I knew about the land sale," she wrote. "I knew it was wrong. I signed the papers because Kevin said it was the only way. I told myself Dad would forgive us. I told myself we would pay it back someday. I lied to myself every single day, Mom. But I swear on everything I am, I did not know Kevin killed Dad. I did not know until that night, in the sugar house when you played the video. When I heard what Kevin said on that recording, my whole life collapsed. Everything I thought I knew became a lie. She asked about Autumn and Mason. She asked if they were eating well, if they were sleeping through the night, if Autumn was still drawing. She asked if Mason still talked about wanting to be a firefighter. She asked if they hated her. "Please do not let them hate me," she wrote. "I know I do not deserve to ask you for anything. But they are my children, and I am terrified that by the time I get out, they will not remember who I was before all of this." The letter ended simply, "I love you, Mom. I am sorry. I know those words are not enough. They will never be enough." I read the letter twice. Then I folded it carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and put it in the top drawer of my dresser beside Thomas's watch and his reading glasses. I did not write back that day, or the next, or the next. The second letter arrived on April 17th. It was shorter, 1 page. Jessica described a fight in the cafeteria that left another inmate with a broken nose. She described the fear she carried in her body at all hours, the way her shoulders never relaxed, the way she flinched at every loud sound. She said she had started attending a group counseling session on Wednesday evenings. She said the counselor, a woman named Dr. Erin Marsh, had asked her to write down 3 things she was grateful for every day. Jessica said she wrote the same 3 things each time: Autumn, Mason, and the memory of her father teaching her to tap a maple tree when she was 6 years old. I put the second letter in the drawer beside the first. On April 22nd, I drove to the cemetery. The oldest maple stood guard over Thomas's grave, its branches just beginning to bud, the faintest green appearing at the tips like tiny promises. I brought a folding chair from the truck and sat beside the headstone. The engraving read, "Thomas James Sullivan, beloved husband, father, and steward of the land, 1954 to 2025. I spoke to him the way I always did, as if he were sitting in the chair beside me with a cup of coffee and his worn flannel shirt." She wrote to me, "Thomas," I said, "twice now. She says she is sorry. She says she did not know about what Kevin did to you. I believe her. I have turned it over in my mind 1,000 times, and I believe her. But believing her does not make it hurt less. She helped steal our land. She signed the papers. She looked me in the eye at Thanksgiving and said everything was fine while she was selling the ground your father cleared with his own hands." A robin landed on the headstone and tilted its head as if listening. "I do not know how to forgive her yet," I said. "I do not even know what forgiveness looks like from here. I know what the Bible says. I know what the counselors say. I know what Dorothy tells me over coffee every Thursday morning. But knowing and feeling are 2 different countries, and I have not found the bridge between them." I sat there for an hour. The sun moved across the sky. The shadows of the maple branches shifted over the grave, like slow hands reaching. On the drive home, I stopped at the general store and bought a pack of lined paper and a box of envelopes. I sat at the kitchen table that evening after the children were in bed. Ryan was reading in the living room. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock Thomas had mounted above the doorway 30 years ago. I picked up a pen and stared at the blank page. I did not know what to write. I did not know how to be a mother to a daughter in prison. I did not know how to hold anger and love in the same hand without one of them cutting me. But I knew that silence was its own kind of cruelty, and I had lived inside enough silence to last a lifetime. I wrote 4 words. "Dear Jessica." I read. I sealed the envelope, wrote the address of the Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility, and placed it by the front door for tomorrow's mail. It was not forgiveness. It was not absolution. It was not even a full sentence. But it was a door, cracked open the width of a fingernail, letting in just enough light to see by. I almost turned the car around 3 times on the drive to Burlington. The first time was at the intersection of Route 15 and Maple Street, where the gas station sits on the corner and the road splits between East and Home. My hands tightened on the wheel, and I sat through the green light until the car behind me honked. The second time was at the highway entrance, where the sign read Burlington 32 miles and my foot hovered over the brake. The third time was in the parking lot of the Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility where I sat with the engine running for 11 minutes, watching the clock change from 9:19 to 9:30. It was May 7th, a Wednesday. Visiting hours began at 10. Ryan had offered to drive me. I told him no. Dorothy Chen had offered to wait in the car. I told her no. This was something I needed to do alone. The building was gray concrete and razor wire. The parking lot was half full. Mostly older cars. Mostly women behind the wheels. Mothers and wives and sisters, all carrying the weight of someone else's mistakes through the front door of a place none of them ever imagined they would visit. I signed in at the front desk. A guard named Officer Rita Sanchez checked my identification and asked me to empty my pockets. I placed Thomas's watch on the tray. The old Timex with the cracked leather band that he wore every day for 30 years. It felt wrong to leave it there, like setting down a piece of him in a place he would never have chosen to be. The visiting room was smaller than I expected. Plastic chairs faced a long counter divided by thick glass panels. Black telephones hung on both sides. A woman 2 chairs to my left was crying quietly, pressing her palm flat against the partition. I sat down in chair number 6 and waited. 3 minutes later, a door opened on the other side. A guard escorted Jessica to the chair across from me. She wore an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on her frame. She had lost weight. Her cheekbones were sharper, her hair pulled back in a low ponytail, and without makeup, her face looked 10 years older than 34. She picked up the phone. I picked up mine. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. We simply looked at each other through the glass. Mother and daughter separated by 2 inches of reinforced partition and a lifetime of broken trust. "You came," Jessica said. Her voice was thin through the receiver, like hearing someone speak through water. "I came," I said. "I was not sure you would." "Neither was I." "How are Autumn and Mason?" she asked. "Mason is helping Ryan in the sugar house. He drew you a picture last week. A fire truck. He still wants to be a firefighter." Jessica closed her eyes. A single tear rolled down her left cheek. "And Autumn?" I paused. I thought about lying, but I had lived inside enough lies. "Autumn is struggling," I said. "She is quiet. She sees a counselor every Wednesday. She draws. She asks about you, but she does not say much." After I answer, Jessica nodded. She understood what I was not saying. Autumn was a 10-year-old girl, trying to survive the demolition of everything she trusted, building walls and hiding behind them. "Does she hate me?" Jessica whispered. "No. She is scared. There is a difference." Jessica leaned forward until her forehead nearly touched the glass. "Mom, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it. Not just listen. Hear it." I am listening. I replay that night every single day. The sugar house. The video. Kevin's voice. The look on your face when you held up the scaffold diagram. I cannot escape it. And I do not want to. Because I deserve to carry it. I chose to sign those papers. I chose to lie to you. I chose Kevin's word over Dad's safety. Nobody forced me. I was afraid and selfish and weak. And because of that, Dad is gone, and you are raising my children, and I am sitting behind glass in an orange suit. Her voice cracked. She pressed her free hand against the partition. "I am not asking you to forgive me," she said. "I do not think I have the right to ask for that. But I need you to know that I understand what I did. I understand the size of it, and I will spend every day for the rest of my life trying to become someone who deserves to sit across from you without this glass between us." I looked at my daughter. I looked at the lines on her face that had not been there 6 months ago, beneath the anger and the grief and the betrayal that still lived in my chest like a second heartbeat. I saw the girl who used to press maple leaves into books and name every tree in the grove. I saw the child who fell asleep in my lap during thunderstorms. I raised my hand and placed it flat against the glass, directly over hers. 2 inches of partition between us. 2 inches and 8 years, and a wound that might never fully close. I read your letters, I said. Every word. A sound escaped her that was not quite a cry and not quite a breath. It was the sound of someone being given something so small it should not matter. But it mattered more than anything in the world. Thank you, Mom, she whispered. The guard announced 5 minutes remaining. I kept my hand on the glass. Jessica kept hers. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere a door opened and closed. I will come back, I said. Next month, Jessica nodded. She could not speak. The guard led her away. She looked back once before the door closed. I stayed seated for a moment, the phone still in my hand, the glass still warm where our palms had been. I walked out into the May sunshine. The air smelled like cut grass and rain. I retrieved Thomas's watch from the tray, strapped it back onto my wrist, and felt its familiar weight settle against my skin. On the drive home, I rolled the window down and let the spring air fill the car. The trees along the highway were fully green, that bright, impossible green that Vermont wears in May, like a promise it intends to keep. I was not ready to forgive, but I was no longer afraid of the word. New Year's Eve arrived without fanfare. I did not watch the ball drop on television. I did not open a bottle of champagne or count down from 10. I stood on the back porch of the farmhouse at 11:45, wrapped in Thomas's old flannel jacket, and watched the snow fall over the maple grove. The trees were bare, their branches dark against the white sky. But I knew what lived beneath the frozen ground. Roots, deep and tangled, and older than memory. Roots that had survived drought and flood and ice storms and the weight of 100 Vermont winters. They would survive this too. Inside, Ryan sat on the couch with Mason asleep against his shoulder. Autumn was curled in the armchair, with a book open on her lap, though her eyes had closed 20 minutes ago. The maple leaf lamp glowed on the side table. The clock above the doorway ticked the way it had ticked for 30 years, steady and faithful, marking time the way Thomas had mounted it to do. 2026, a new year. People say that phrase as if turning a calendar page could erase what came before. It cannot. The old year does not disappear. It settles into your bones and becomes part of the structure that holds you upright. Every year I have lived is still inside me. The year I married Thomas. The year Ryan was born. The year Jessica arrived, red-faced and screaming, on a Tuesday morning in July. The year Thomas died. The year I learned the truth. They are all here, layered like rings inside a maple trunk. I thought about what I had lost. A husband. A daughter. At least for now. The version of my family that I believed was whole and honest and good. I thought about Kevin sitting in a cell 200 miles away, serving the first of 25 years for killing the man who had welcomed him into our home and taught him how to tap a tree. I thought about Randall Holt and Christine Novak, whose greed had turned my family's land into a transaction. I thought about the sugar house, still standing at the edge of the grove, cleaned and quiet now, the cameras and microphones removed, the evaporator cold. But I also thought about what I had gained. 2 grandchildren sleeping inside a warm house. A son who showed up every morning without being asked. A neighbor named Dorothy who brought cinnamon rolls on Thursdays and never once told me to move on. A lawyer named Frank who called once a month to check in. A detective named Harlow who sent a Christmas card with a handwritten note that said, "Thomas would be proud of you, Maggie." I reached into the pocket of Thomas's jacket and found what I always found there. A maple seed. One of those winged seeds that children call helicopters, dried and brown and light as paper. Thomas used to collect them. He would pick them up from the ground during autumn walks and slip them into his pockets without thinking. The way some men collect coins or receipts. After he died, I found 17 of them in various jackets and coat pockets. I kept every one. I held the seed between my fingers and turned it slowly. Such a small thing. No bigger than my thumbnail. But inside it lived the blueprint for an entire tree. Roots and trunk and branches and leaves and sap that could be boiled into something sweet. All of it waiting inside a shell no heavier than a breath. That is what I had learned this year. That the smallest things carry the most weight. A handwritten note, in a dead man's notebook. A torn page, hidden behind paint cans. 4 words in a letter to a daughter in prison. A child's drawing of a family tree. A hand pressed against visiting room glass. None of these things were large. None of them made the evening news or changed the course of history. But they changed me. They changed everything. The clock inside struck midnight. I heard it through the window, 12 steady chimes that Ryan had wound that morning the way Thomas always did. I closed my eyes and let the sound wash over me. When I opened them, the snow was still falling. The grove was still dark. The farmhouse was still standing. I was still standing. In the morning, I would make pancakes. I would use the maple syrup that Ryan and Mason had bottled last spring, the first batch from the season, dark and rich and tasting like the land itself. I would set the table for 4. I would pour orange juice into the glasses Thomas bought at the county fair in 1989. Autumn would come downstairs with her hair tangled and her book tucked under her arm. Mason would ask for extra syrup. Ryan would drink his coffee black and read the weather report aloud even though nobody asked him to. We would sit together in the kitchen of a farmhouse built by hands that are gone now but whose work remains. We would eat. We would talk about small things, and the roots beneath us would hold. The way they have always held. The way they will continue to hold. Long after I am gone, and these children have children of their own. And the maple grove grows tall enough to touch the sky. I put the seed back in the pocket where Thomas left it. I went inside, locked the door, and turned off the porch light. The snow kept falling in the dark, covering the yard, the sugar house, the grove, and the grave beneath the oldest tree, covering everything with silence and white, the way Vermont has always done, burying the wounds of one year to make room for the next. I checked on the children one last time. Mason had shifted in his sleep, one arm hanging off the couch. I lifted it gently and tucked it beneath the blanket. Autumn's book had slid to the floor. I picked it up, marked her page with a maple leaf I kept on the mantel, and set it on the side table. Ryan looked up at me. "Happy New Year, Mom," he said quietly. I touched his shoulder. "Happy New Year, sweetheart." I walked to my bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed, Thomas's side still undisturbed after all these months, the pillow still holding the shape of a man who will never lay his head there again. I placed my hand on that pillow and held it there. "We made it, Thomas," I whispered. "Another year." Then I lay down, closed my eyes, and let the farmhouse hold me the way it has held every Sullivan who ever lived within its walls. With patience, with silence, with roots that go deeper than grief, deeper than betrayal, deeper than any wound the world can deliver. The roots hold. That is what maple trees teach you if you pay attention long enough. The roots always hold. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment below. Tell me, if you were in Maggie's place, would you have forgiven your daughter? What would you have done differently? Subscribe and share this story with someone who needs to hear it today.